Hello world, Lisa Fredrickson, your friend and computer science professor with another short screencast, this time on JavaScript. Here we are at my homepage where all of my YouTubes are listed. For this one, we're going to the JavaScript glossary page and continuing with our new terminology playlist. In our first JavaScript terminology YouTube, we covered objects because JavaScript is an object-oriented program like most modern programming languages. We compared and contrasted objects to arrays. In our second YouTube in the series, we talked about built-in objects that the JavaScript environment gives you, the document, the console, and the window objects, which are oh so valuable to the JavaScript programmer. In this screencast, we're going to cover properties, methods, and functions because those three keywords are essential to your success as a JavaScript developer. And to do that, I've created this short little web page and I have with one script. And in it, I have declared the prof variable and assigned it to something in curly braces. And we know that when we see something in curly braces like this assignment statement, we have assigned it to an object. An object is made up of information. It's merely a storage container. And we name the information with key value pairs, more specifically called property names. Now, the first two property names, fname and lname, are assigned to primitive strings, and that's pretty straightforward. And let's go over to the console here and prove that we have that information coded correctly by typing prof.fname. And we know the dot operator is what separates an object name from a property. And it's returning Lisa as we're expecting. Prof.lname is returning Fredrickson as we have expected. But what about this address property? Look what it's assigned to. It's assigned to something in curly braces, another object. So how do we dig out information out of this entire object that's stored in the address property? If I type in prof.address, I get the entire object. If I type in prof.address.state, for example, then I can pull out just the state property out of the address property, which stores an object out of the prof object. So you'll see that dot operator used to access a property of an object, which is a property of another object. Prof.salary is going to pull out a number. Prof.education is going to pull out a number. And then we get to bonus. And look what bonus contains. It contains a function. Now here we're using curly braces to surround not an object this time, but all the statements inside a function. So curly braces have a couple of different roles in JavaScript as they do in most programming languages. Here's the key thing. When a property contains a function, we refer to that property as a method. It's really a property, but it contains a function, so we call it a method. I'll clear my console. Let's try this method. How do we run a method? Well, because it contains a function, we run it just like we would a function. We run it with the parentheses. Prof.bonus, left, right parenthesis, and it returns 100,099. And that's because if we look at this logic, if this object's .education property is greater than 16, and right now it is, it's 18, then we're going to do this statement, return this salary, which is 99999 plus 100, and that gives us this number here. If we crank that education down to 16 or less, and we save and we refresh, and we run that statement again, prof.bonus, then this is going to be false, and we're returning this .salary. Now, if you're not familiar with functions yet, please run over to my Function 101 playlist to learn the when, what, where, why, and how we create functions, because there are several different ways to create functions in JavaScript. JavaScript is also a functional programming language, given the code in your scripts is going to be surrounded by functions so that we can save that code, rerun that code when we want to run it. But this YouTube is simply to say that when a property contains a function, it is referred to as a method. And let's use that same concept to work on the built-in object of the document. If we go to line 28, We know from the previous screencast that the document is probably the most important built-in object that we're going to work on in JavaScript, given that represents everything on the web page. We use the dot operator to get inside that object and access its properties and methods. This time we're working on the element by ID method. We know it's a method because we see the parentheses. In this case, this method requires an argument, a piece of information that's passed into the method to help it work. We're getting the element by ID with info. That happens to be this paragraph right here. And that method is evidently returning an object because looky here, we have another dot. So we're using the document objects, element by ID method, to return another object. And then we're getting into that object's style property, which is evidently returning another object because we have another dot. And then we're getting into the color property of that object and assigning it red. And that's how this paragraph has a text color of red. So all the concepts of a unique custom object you build also apply to the built-in objects that JavaScript provides to us. Thank you.